I'm Autumn Hayes, 34, standing at the helm of a multi-million-dollar branding agency. 5 years ago, I was silently crying in a taxi, fleeing from a luxury restaurant where my husband had just humiliated me in front of Boston's elite. That night destroyed and remade me. The woman who walked out of that dinner emerged with nothing but heartbreak and determination. The empire I built from those ashes now makes Maxwell watch from the sidelines, wondering what might have been. Before I tell you how I built an empire that made my ex-husband's jaw drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you've ever walked away from something toxic and found your power. Maxwell Brooks and I met during our junior year at Northwestern University. I was in the library, surrounded by marketing textbooks, struggling to keep my scholarship while working part-time. He was the handsome finance major who sat down at my table without asking, flashing a smile that suggested he'd never been told no. "That's my spot," I said, not looking up. "Funny, I don't see your name on it," he replied, sliding a coffee toward me. "Peace offering." I was a scholarship kid from a middle-class family in Michigan. My parents had remortgaged their home to cover what my financial aid didn't. Every grade, every networking opportunity mattered. Maxwell, by contrast, was old money. His grandfather had founded a successful investment firm, his father sat on multiple corporate boards, and Northwestern was merely the expected Brooks family tradition. Despite our differences, something clicked. Maxwell challenged me intellectually, in ways no one else had. When I'd talk about consumer psychology and brand development, he'd actually listen, asking questions that pushed my thinking further. For a girl used to being overlooked, his attention was intoxicating. Our first official date was at a campus coffee shop. I wore my nicest sweater, already washed too many times. He showed up in what I later learned was a casually expensive outfit that cost more than my monthly rent. We talked for 4 hours straight. When he walked me back to my dorm, he didn't try to come up. Instead, he asked if he could see me again tomorrow. By graduation, we were inseparable. I had job offers from 2 marketing firms in Chicago, but Maxwell had received an opportunity at a prestigious financial firm in Boston. It was his dream, he said, the stepping stone to everything he'd worked toward. "Come with me," he said, holding my hands in his. "We'll conquer Boston together." I believed him. I turned down my offers and followed him to Boston with vague promises of connections he'd make for me once we settled. Instead, I found myself in a supporting role, accompanying him to networking events where I was introduced as Maxwell's girlfriend rather than Autumn Hayes' marketing specialist. I started building a small client base from our apartment, doing freelance marketing work, while Maxwell climbed the corporate ladder. We married when I was 26, a lavish wedding that his parents largely orchestrated. I was too swept up in the romance to notice how my voice grew softer each time Maxwell spoke over me. Looking back, the warning signs were there from the beginning. The way he'd dismiss my business ideas as cute, how he'd explain my own industry to me at parties, the subtle control over our finances, even as my own consultancy began to bring in respectable income. "You don't understand how money works at this level," he'd say whenever I questioned our spending or suggested more investment in my business. "That's why you have me." My college friends noticed the changes in me first. Rachel, my roommate from freshman year, visited 6 months after our wedding and pulled me aside. "What happened to the girl who wanted to revolutionize how women-owned businesses marketed themselves?" she asked. "I'm still building toward that," I defended. "It's just more complicated now. Maxwell's career needs support. We're a team." "Are you?" Rachel asked, looking around our expensive apartment decorated entirely to Maxwell's taste. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're his cheerleader, not his teammate." I dismissed her concerns. What did Rachel know about marriage, about compromise? Maxwell and I had different strengths, different roles. Besides, I was making progress with my small consultancy, building a portfolio of local businesses that appreciated my personalized approach to marketing. By our 3rd anniversary, Maxwell's star was rising fast at his firm. I'd become adept at hosting dinners for his colleagues, knowing exactly how to make him shine. Meanwhile, my client list had grown enough that I was considering renting a small office space rather than working from our guest bedroom. The distance between us grew proportionally to Maxwell's success. Nights of intimate conversation had been replaced by networking events. Weekends exploring Boston together had become Maxwell golfing with partners while I caught up on work I'd postponed to attend his functions. But I convinced myself this was temporary, just the necessary sacrifice period before our shared success. The truth was, I was becoming increasingly isolated. My family visited less frequently because Maxwell made them feel unwelcome. My college friends stopped calling after being rescheduled one too many times due to Maxwell's sudden work emergencies. My world had contracted to Maxwell's orbit and I hadn't even noticed. The first clear crack in our marriage appeared at Maxwell's promotion celebration. After 3 years at the firm, he'd been made a senior investment analyst. I'd spent weeks planning a dinner party at our apartment, coordinating with his favorite restaurant for catering, selecting wines that would impress his boss. As guests raised glasses to toast his success, Maxwell gave a speech. He thanked his mentors, his colleagues, even the firm's administrative assistant. My name never left his lips, though I'd edited the presentation that secured his promotion, staying up until 3 a.m. while he slept. Later that night, as I was cleaning up after everyone had left, I mentioned the omission. "Don't be so sensitive," he said, loosening his tie. "It was a professional accomplishment. No one brings their spouse into those acknowledgments." 3 people specifically thanked their wives tonight, I countered. Those were older partners with trophy wives who do nothing but plan charity lunches. You're different. You have your little marketing hobby. My hobby had landed its first significant client that month, a local boutique whose rebranding had doubled their foot traffic. I'd been waiting for the right moment to share my success with Maxwell, but suddenly realized there would never be a right moment. Around this time, I began noticing Maxwell's lingering glances at his colleague Audrey. The touches that lasted too long at office parties. The text messages at odd hours that he'd quickly hide when I entered the room. When I finally gathered courage to ask about Audrey, his response was immediate and practiced. "You're being paranoid," he said, looking genuinely concerned. "Is everything okay with you? You've seemed really stressed lately. Maybe you're taking on too much with your little projects." The conversation somehow ended with me apologizing for my unfounded jealousy while Maxwell magnanimously forgave me. It was the first time I recognized his skill at turning any criticism of him into a flaw of mine. 2 months later, I reconnected with Rachel after she moved to Boston for a job. Over coffee, away from Maxwell's influence, I found myself sharing concerns I hadn't even acknowledged to myself. "He makes me feel like I'm crazy whenever I question anything," I admitted. "Like my perception of reality is flawed." "That's called gaslighting," Rachel said bluntly. "And from what you're describing, he's an expert at it." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been reading self-help books on how to be a better wife, when perhaps I should have been questioning whether I was in a healthy marriage at all. I tried discussing our relationship issues with Maxwell that night. To my surprise, he agreed things hadn't been ideal. "We're both focused on our careers," he said, taking my hands in his. "I've been preoccupied with this new client portfolio. I'll do better, I promise." For 2 weeks he was attentive and present. He asked about my clients. He brought home flowers. He suggested weekend trips. Just as I began to relax, thinking we'd turned a corner, everything reverted. The late nights at the office resumed. The dismissive comments about my business returned. I suggested marriage counseling. Maxwell agreed after minimal resistance, which surprised me. We attended exactly 1 session during which Maxwell was charming, reflective, and seemingly committed to improvement. The therapist was impressed by his emotional intelligence. Maxwell refused to schedule a second session. "That woman was clearly biased against successful men," he said. "Did you see how she kept trying to make everything my fault? Besides, we had a good talk. I think we're on the right track now." Despite growing evidence that our marriage was fundamentally unbalanced, I still hoped for change. I'd invested 5 years in this relationship. I'd moved cities, shaped my career around his, integrated into his social circle. Starting over seemed impossible. Then came the Bingham account. Maxwell had been pursuing this client for months, a wealthy family office that would bring significant prestige to his firm. The night before his pitch, he panicked. His presentation was unfocused, his financial projections unconvincing. I stayed up all night restructuring his entire pitch. I developed a narrative that highlighted the family's multi-generational values while showcasing Maxwell's understanding of their unique position. I created visuals that simplified complex investment strategies into compelling stories. Maxwell landed the account. His boss called it the most innovative pitch he'd seen in years. Maxwell accepted the praise without a single mention of my contribution. When Maxwell was promoted to partner at Blackwell & Stone Investments, it represented everything he'd been working toward since I'd known him. At 34, he was their youngest partner in 2 decades. The celebration dinner was scheduled at Maison Laurent, the most exclusive restaurant in Boston where reservations required connections rather than merely money. I spent weeks preparing for this night. I found a midnight blue evening gown that made me feel both elegant and powerful. I researched the backgrounds of everyone who would be attending, making mental notes of conversation topics for each. I even practiced anecdotes that would subtly highlight Maxwell's strategic thinking and leadership qualities. The restaurant's private dining room overlooked Boston Harbor, the city lights reflecting like stars across the water. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the hand-carved mahogany table set for 16. As guests arrived, the firm's senior partners and their spouses, I performed the role of the supportive wife flawlessly. "Maxwell always speaks so highly of you," said Margaret Blackwell, the founding partner's wife. "Such a blessing to have a supportive spouse in this industry." Maxwell was in his element, accepting congratulations with practiced humility, while ensuring his glass of 25-year-old scotch never emptied. I noticed him watching Audrey, who had been invited as part of the deal team, her red dress striking against the conservative attire of the other women present. By the third course, a delicate sea bass with truffle foam, Maxwell had consumed enough alcohol to loosen the tight control he typically maintained over his public persona. The conversation had turned to work-life balance, prompted by senior partner William Stone mentioning his upcoming 30th anniversary. "The secret to success in this business," William said, "is having someone at home who understands the sacrifices required. My Elizabeth has been my rock." Elizabeth Stone, a distinguished woman in her 60s, smiled warmly at her husband. "Partnership goes both ways. William has supported my charitable foundation with the same dedication I've given his career. Autumn has been quite understanding of the demands as well," Margaret offered, smiling at me. "Maxwell tells us she even runs her own little marketing business from home while supporting his career." I felt Maxwell stiffen beside me before he let out a laugh that contained no actual humor. "Understanding isn't the word I'd use," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet table. "Decorative, perhaps, like the art we hang in the office lobby." The silence that followed felt physical. Margaret's smile froze. William cleared his throat. "Maxwell," I said quietly, "I think you've had enough to drink." He ignored me, turning to face the table more fully. "You all talk about partnership, but let's be honest. Our wives serve a function. They host the right parties, wear the right clothes, say the right things to the right people." He gestured with his glass scotch sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "Autumn here thinks she's building some kind of women's marketing empire from our guest bedroom. It's cute. Keeps her busy while I handle the actual financial decisions." I sat perfectly still, my face burning as 16 pairs of eyes darted between us. "Of course," Maxwell continued, "some of us need more than just a showpiece wife. The demands of our position require additional support." His gaze slid meaningfully to Audrey, who had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Isn't that right, Audrey? You've been quite supportive during those late-night strategy sessions." The implication hung in the air like poison gas. In one statement, Maxwell had revealed his affair and humiliated me in front of the most influential people in his professional circle. In that moment, something inside me crystallized. The fog of doubt and insecurity that had clouded my judgment for years cleared instantly. I could see Maxwell clearly, for perhaps the first time, not the charming, brilliant man I'd convinced myself he was, but the insecure, cruel person who derived power from diminishing others. I placed my napkin beside my plate and stood, my movements deliberate and controlled, despite the earthquake happening inside me. "I want to thank everyone for their congratulations on Maxwell's promotion," I said, my voice steadier than I could have hoped. "He's worked very hard for this recognition, and now he's shown you exactly who he is, which saves me the trouble of having to explain it later." I turned to Maxwell, whose expression had shifted from smug satisfaction to alarm. "I've spent 5 years editing myself smaller to make room for your ego. Tonight you've made it abundantly clear that no amount of self-erasure would ever be enough." I removed my wedding ring and placed it beside his glass. "Consider this my resignation from the position of decorative wife. I'm sure Audrey can handle the additional responsibilities." I walked out without looking back, though the absolute silence told me every eye in the room was following my exit. Outside, the cool April air hit my face, bringing with it the first sensation of freedom I'd felt in years. The valet called a taxi, his expression carefully neutral, despite having overheard the commotion through the open terrace doors. In the taxi, I allowed myself exactly 5 minutes of tears. Not for Maxwell, he didn't deserve them, but for the years I'd wasted believing I wasn't enough. For the woman who had gradually surrendered her voice, her ambitions, her sense of self, to become an accessory in someone else's life. By the time the taxi reached our Beacon Hill brownstone, my tears had dried. I packed 2 suitcases with essentials, clothes, important documents, my laptop, and the external hard drive containing all my client work. I left my wedding album but took the necklace my grandmother had left me, which Maxwell had always called provincial. On the marble entryway table, I placed a single note: "I deserve better than to be your punchline." Then I walked out the door of the home we'd shared, stepping into an uncertain future that, despite its challenges, suddenly held more promise than the gilded cage I was leaving behind. I woke up the next morning in a hotel room that cost more per night than I could realistically afford. Sunlight filtered through unfamiliar curtains as the events of the previous night crashed over me in waves. Fear gripped me first. What had I done? Where would I go? How would I support myself? But beneath the fear lay something unexpected. A sense of lightness, of possibility. My phone showed 17 missed calls and 23 text messages from Maxwell. They tracked a predictable emotional journey: initial confusion, then apologies, claiming drunkenness, then anger at my overreaction, and finally threats about financial consequences. The last message read, "You're making a mistake you can't afford. Come home and we'll pretend last night never happened." That's when I knew I could never go back. Maxwell wasn't sorry for what he'd done, he was sorry I'd finally responded with appropriate self-respect. I called Rachel, who answered on the first ring. "I saw your texts. Are you okay?" "I left Maxwell," I said, the words still surreal. "Thank God," she replied without hesitation. "My spare bedroom is yours, for as long as you need it." Moving into Rachel's modest Cambridge apartment was a startling adjustment after years of luxury. Her spare bedroom barely fit a twin bed, with my clothes relegated to storage bins stacked against the wall, but the small space felt honest in a way my spacious Beacon Hill home never had. My next call was to Jessica Bennett, a divorce attorney whose branding I'd helped develop the previous year. She agreed to meet me that afternoon, listening intently as I described both the dinner incident and the pattern of emotional manipulation that preceded it. "Massachusetts is a no-fault state," she explained, "but Maxwell's behavior and the public nature of last night's events might give us some leverage. The bigger issue is that you've been financially dependent on him while building your business." "I wasn't dependent," I protested. "I contributed to our household." Jessica gave me a sympathetic but firm look. "Did you have equal access to all accounts, equal decision-making about investments, a salary agreement for the work you did to support his career?" My silence answered her questions. "That's what I thought. We'll fight for your fair share, but prepare yourself for a battle." The battle began swiftly. Maxwell froze our joint accounts the day after I left. My credit cards were canceled. The lease on my car in Maxwell's name was terminated. I found myself suddenly without access to the comfortable life I'd grown accustomed to. I took a part-time position at a local marketing firm to cover immediate expenses while maintaining my small client base in the evenings. Working from Rachel's kitchen table, I stretched myself thin, trying to stay afloat while building a case for my divorce settlement. Maxwell, meanwhile, controlled the narrative among our social circle. According to mutual friends, I had suffered some kind of breakdown, becoming irrationally jealous and abandoning our marriage without warning. Most people who I'd thought were friends were actually Maxwell's connections, and they closed ranks around him quickly. 6 weeks after leaving, I hit my lowest point. Standing in a grocery store checkout line, my debit card was declined on a $42 purchase of basic necessities. I had exactly $7.36 in cash, not enough for even half my items. The cashier began removing groceries from bags as a line formed behind me. Tears of humiliation burned in my eyes as I tried to decide which essentials I could afford. That night, Rachel found me crying on the pull-out couch. "This was a mistake," I sobbed. "I had a beautiful home, financial security, a husband who publicly humiliated you and cheated on you," Rachel interrupted. "Who systematically undermined your confidence and controlled your life. Who saw you as decorative rather than essential." At least I could buy groceries. Rachel sat beside me. "Listen to me, Autumn. You are not the first woman to leave an emotionally abusive marriage and face financial hardship. You won't be the last. But I've known you since we were 18, and you are one of the most brilliant, determined people I've ever met. This is temporary. This is the valley before the mountain." That conversation became a turning point. I stopped measuring my situation against what I'd lost and started focusing on what I could build. My remaining clients, a local spa and a women's boutique, stuck with me through the transition, impressed by my dedication despite personal challenges. I began specializing in branding for female entrepreneurs, particularly those in the wellness space. Working with women who had built businesses from nothing inspired me daily. They didn't have Maxwell's connections or family money, but their authenticity and vision were changing their communities. The divorce proceedings dragged on for 8 months. Maxwell fought every request using his financial advantage to delay proceedings and run up my legal bills. When the dust finally settled, I walked away with far less than I deserved, according to Jessica, but with something priceless: my complete freedom. During our final court appearance, Maxwell approached me in the hallway. "You look terrible," he said, taking in my simple department store dress and less expensive haircut. "When reality hits and you can't maintain even this lifestyle, you'll come crawling back." I studied his face, handsome as ever but now transparent to me. The insecurity beneath his cruelty was suddenly obvious. "Thank you, Maxwell," I said genuinely. "For what?" he asked, suspicious. "For showing me exactly who you are at that dinner. Some women spend decades married to men like you without ever getting such a clear glimpse of the truth." His face darkened. "You'll regret this." "I already regret the 5 years I spent trying to be someone I'm not. I won't waste another minute doing the same." Walking away from him that day, I coined the phrase that would eventually become my business mantra: the most expensive mistake is staying in a situation that costs you your self-worth. With my divorce finalized and a modest settlement secured barely enough to cover my legal fees and 3 months of living expenses, I faced a critical decision. I could look for a stable marketing job at an established firm providing immediate financial security but limited growth. Or I could bet on myself and build the business I'd always envisioned. I chose to bet on myself. I spent 2 weeks developing a comprehensive business plan for a branding agency, specifically focused on female entrepreneurs. My market research revealed a significant gap. While women were launching businesses at unprecedented rates, they were largely underserved by traditional branding agencies that didn't understand their unique challenges and advantages. I named my company Phoenix Rising Branding, a nod to my own rebirth from the ashes of my marriage and a promise to clients that their businesses could experience similar transformation. The next hurdle was financing. No bank would approve a business loan for a recently divorced woman with limited credit history in her own name. After 5 rejections, I reached out to Karen Mathers, a former client who had successfully scaled her accounting firm and occasionally mentored women entrepreneurs. "Your business model is solid," Karen said, after reviewing my plan. "But you need runway to build this properly. I'll co-sign a small business loan if you agree to monthly mentoring sessions." With Karen's help, I secured a $75,000 loan, far less than ideal, but enough to begin. I found an affordable office space in an up-and-coming neighborhood of Boston, a former storage room with exposed brick walls and unreliable heating. The rent was manageable, and the industrial aesthetic would eventually become part of our brand identity. My first 2 team members came from unexpected places. Zoe was a marketing student at Boston University who emailed asking for an internship after hearing me speak at a women's business seminar. Mia was a talented graphic designer I met at a divorce support group, who had similarly been rebuilding her life and career. "I can't offer competitive salaries yet," I told them honestly. "But I can promise meaningful work credit for your ideas and equity potential if we hit our growth targets." The early months were a brutal education in entrepreneurship. I cold-called potential clients daily, facing rejection after rejection. I networked at every female entrepreneur event in Boston, collecting business cards and following up persistently. I worked 18-hour days, sometimes sleeping on the office couch rather than returning to Rachel's apartment. Our first significant setback came 3 months in when a promising contract with a women's professional organization fell through at the last minute. They went with a more established agency, I told Zoe and Mia, fighting to keep my voice steady. "But we're going to be fine." That night, alone in the office, I questioned everything. Maybe Maxwell was right. Maybe I was fooling myself thinking I could build something significant. Maybe I should have stayed in my beautiful home and accepted my role as the decorative, supportive wife. The next morning, I made a strategic decision. Instead of pursuing clients across all industries, we would specialize further in wellness-focused women-owned businesses, spas, organic product lines, fitness studios, holistic health practices. The alignment between these businesses' values and our own created an authentic connection that larger agencies couldn't match. This pivot led to our first major client, Diana's Organics, a struggling skincare line created by a former dermatologist. Diana had invested her savings in developing exceptional products but struggled with branding that failed to communicate their efficacy and value. "Everyone tells me to make it pink and flowery," Diana told me during our initial meeting. "But my products are backed by medical research. They're effective, not just pretty." "What if we could communicate both?" I asked. scientific credibility wrapped in an aesthetic that feels premium rather than clinical. We developed a complete rebranding for Diana's line, sophisticated packaging in deep green and gold that stood out from competitors' website copy that balanced technical information with aspirational messaging, and a social media strategy featuring real women's results rather than models. Within 3 months, Diana's sales had tripled. Within 6, she was being courted by high-end retailers. Her success became our most powerful marketing tool, leading to referrals throughout Boston's female entrepreneur community. As business grew, so did our team. We hired a social media specialist, a content writer, and 2 more designers. Our tiny office became cramped quarters for 8 women working elbow to elbow. The bathroom doubled as a storage closet. The conference room was a partition created from IKEA bookshelves, but energy and purpose filled the space in a way that my former Beacon Hill home never experienced. The pace took its toll. I developed migraines from lack of sleep. I lost weight. My social life was non-existent beyond team dinners and client meetings. Rachel, now officially our operations manager, finally intervened. "You escaped one unhealthy situation just to create another," she said. "You're working yourself into collapse." "The business needs me," I protested. "The business needs you healthy and functioning," she countered. "You've built a team. Start trusting them to carry some of the weight." Learning to delegate was my hardest challenge. I'd been so accustomed to handling everything myself, first out of necessity when starting, then out of habit as we grew. Gradually, I developed systems that allowed team members to make decisions without my constant involvement. I established regular hours and actually went home most nights. I even joined a yoga class, finding unexpected peace in the practice. Our first-year anniversary party was held in our office with 20 clients, and our team of 8 celebrating over champagne and catered food that no longer strained my budget. Boston Business Journal had run a feature on female-founded agencies disrupting the marketing landscape, with Phoenix Rising prominently featured. The article caught Maxwell's attention. After 13 months of silence, he texted, "Saw the piece in BBJ. Impressive. Coffee sometime to catch up." I stared at the message for a long time, remembering the woman who would have jumped at this olive branch, desperate for validation from the man who had shaped her sense of worth for so long. "No thank you," I replied simply. "My schedule is quite full with the business." He didn't text again. As we moved into our second year, Phoenix Rising had established a reputation for transformative branding that honored the authentic voices of women entrepreneurs. Our client waiting list had grown to the point that we could be selective about projects. Our revenue allowed us to move to a larger office with actual walls and functioning heat. And I had finally begun to recognize the woman in the mirror. Again, older, wiser, but with the same fire that had once driven an ambitious marketing student at Northwestern. By our second anniversary, Phoenix Rising had grown to a team of 15 women and 3 men. Our first male hire, a brilliant UI designer named Jason, had initially applied anonymously, fearing rejection from a female-focused agency. We had moved to a proper office in downtown Boston, not the gleaming skyscraper where Maxwell worked, but a beautifully renovated former textile factory, with exposed beams, abundant natural light, and enough space for our growing operation. Our client roster now included wellness businesses from across New England, with a few national brands beginning to take notice of our distinctive approach. We had developed a reputation for deeply understanding female consumers, not through stereotypes or pinkwashing, but through genuine connection to their values and motivations. Recognizing that our team was our greatest asset, I implemented wellness initiatives that embodied our brand values. Flexible working hours, meditation spaces, monthly wellness stipends, and quarterly personal development days weren't just perks, they were essential to maintaining the creative energy and authenticity that clients came to us for. We can't help wellness brands communicate self-care if we're all running on caffeine and adrenaline, I explained at a team meeting. We have to live our values, not just market them. This philosophy distinguished us from traditional agencies where burnout was considered an occupational hazard. Our employee retention rate of 94% became another selling point with clients who wanted consistency in their branding teams. Then came our first major crisis. Serene Living, a national yoga studio franchise and our largest client representing nearly 25% of our annual revenue, unexpectedly terminated our contract. Their new CEO had brought in a large New York agency, where his brother was a partner. I called an emergency team meeting, transparent about the situation. "This hurts," I acknowledged. but we've built something too important to be derailed by one client decision. We need to focus on 3 things: reassuring our current clients, accelerating outreach to prospects already in our pipeline, and identifying new revenue streams that reduce our vulnerability to any single account. Despite my confident words, I spent that night questioning everything. Without the Serene Living retainer, our comfortable financial cushion would quickly erode. We could survive 6 months, maybe 8, before serious decisions would be needed. For the first time since leaving Maxwell, I considered selling the business. Several larger agencies had expressed interest in acquiring Phoenix Rising, seeing our female wellness expertise as a valuable addition to their portfolios. A sale would provide financial security and relieve the constant pressure of leadership. I scheduled a meeting with Karen, who had remained my mentor long after my loan was repaid. "You've built something remarkable," she said as we walked along the Charles River. "But only you can decide if this chapter of your story is ending or just facing a plot twist." "What would you do?" I asked. Karen stopped walking and turned to face me. "When I was building my accounting firm, I faced a similar moment. My 2 biggest clients left within a month of each other. I considered selling to a regional firm that had been courting me." "But you didn't." I realized I wasn't finished yet. The vision that got me through 16-hour days and missed family gatherings wasn't complete. So instead of retreating, I innovated. I developed a subscription model for ongoing financial services rather than project-based billing. It revolutionized my business and eventually the industry. Her words sparked an idea. Traditional branding agencies operated on a project basis, a complete rebrand followed by occasional updates. What if we created a subscription model for ongoing brand evolution? Many of our wellness clients struggled with consistent content creation and brand maintenance after the initial launch. That night I developed the concept for Phoenix 365, a tiered subscription service, offering everything from monthly social media content to quarterly strategic adjustments based on performance data. By morning I had a complete presentation for the team. The pivot required everything from us. We restructured our creative teams into specialized units supporting different subscription tiers. We developed proprietary analytics tools to demonstrate ROI to skeptical prospects. Everyone from our newest intern to Rachel, now officially our COO, worked around the clock to transform our business model. The first 2 months were terrifying. New subscriptions trickled in too slowly to replace the lost revenue. I took no salary, investing everything back into the transition. Several nights I lay awake wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake. Then in month 3, momentum shifted. A national yoga apparel company signed on for our premium tier. 3 regional wellness chains followed. By month 6, we had not only replaced the lost Serene Living revenue, but exceeded our previous monthly recurring revenue by 40%. The success brought new challenges. Our systems, designed for a smaller operation with project-based work, buckled under the demands of ongoing service delivery. Miscommunications led to missed deadlines. Team members showed signs of burnout despite our wellness initiatives. "We need someone who specializes in operational systems," Rachel admitted. "I've taken us as far as I can, but this is beyond my expertise now." We hired Taylor Chen as our Chief Operations Officer, an experienced executive from a larger agency who was drawn to our mission and culture. Taylor implemented structured workflows, clear accountability metrics, and scalable systems that allowed creative work to flow without administrative bottlenecks. With operations stabilized, I refocused on my strengths, creative direction, and client relationships. For the first time since founding Phoenix Rising, I achieved something resembling work-life balance. I started dating again, nothing serious but enjoyable evenings with interesting people who knew me as Autumn the entrepreneur rather than Maxwell's wife. My new equilibrium was tested when I attended the New England Marketing Association's annual gala. I hadn't planned to go, but Phoenix Rising had been nominated for an innovation award for our subscription model. I wore a simple black dress, my confidence now coming from achievement rather than expensive fabrics. I was at the bar when I heard Maxwell's distinctive laugh. Turning, I saw him with a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to me at 27, the age I'd been when we married. His firm was sponsoring the event, his name prominently displayed on banners throughout the venue. Our eyes met across the room. After a moment's hesitation, Maxwell excused himself from his companion and approached me. "Autumn," he said, his familiar cologne bringing unwelcome memories. "You look well. Congratulations on the nomination." "Thank you," I replied, surprising myself with how little I felt in his presence. The man who had once occupied all my emotional space now seemed smaller, somehow less consequential. I've been following Phoenix Rising's growth, he continued. Quite impressive for a... He paused, clearly editing himself for a new agency. We found our niche, I said simply. I always knew you had potential, he said, his tone suggesting he deserved credit for my success. In fact, I mentioned to several associates that I'd provided your initial guidance in business strategy. 3 years earlier, this attempt to co-opt my achievements would have devastated me. Now it seemed almost pitiful. That's an interesting perspective, I said, maintaining eye contact. But we both know the truth of what you thought about my business ambitions. His smile faltered. Before he could respond, the announcement came that the awards ceremony was beginning. I excused myself to join my team, who had reserved a table near the front. Phoenix Rising won the Innovation Award that night. Standing on stage, looking out at a room of industry peers who now respected me for my own accomplishments, I felt a circle closing. Maxwell sat at his firm's table, politely applauding but unable to hide the calculation in his eyes, as he witnessed what I had built without him. The woman who had fled a humiliating dinner in tears 3 years earlier now commanded attention from the same professional circle that had witnessed her lowest moment. It wasn't about revenge. I had long since moved beyond needing Maxwell's acknowledgement. It was about the journey from defining myself through someone else's eyes to recognizing my own vision and value. As Phoenix Rising approached its 3rd anniversary, the agency had evolved beyond my wildest early ambitions. We occupied 2 full floors in our building with a staff of 40 across 3 cities, Boston, New York, and Chicago. Our subscription model had become a case study in business innovation courses at Northeastern University, and our client waiting list had grown so substantial that we had implemented an application process to ensure alignment with our values. The previous year's feature in Boston Business Journal had been eclipsed by a profile in Forbes' Women Transforming Marketing issue, complete with a photo spread of our diverse team in our stylish headquarters. The photographer had captured me sitting on the edge of my desk, sleeves rolled up, engaged in animated conversation with 3 team members, an image that perfectly embodied our collaborative leadership approach. You're not what I expected, the Forbes writer had commented during our interview. What did you expect? I asked. Based on your success, someone more corporate. But your team describes you as refreshingly human. One called you the anti-boss. I smiled at that. The traditional agency hierarchy creates unnecessary barriers between good ideas and their implementation. We've eliminated those barriers. Good ideas win here, regardless of job title or seniority. This philosophy had fueled our expansion into new territory. Phoenix Academy, our training program for women entrepreneurs, had launched 6 months earlier. The 8-week intensive covered everything from brand storytelling to financial management, taught by successful female founders, including myself. Our first cohort of 30 women had collectively increased their revenue by an average of 42% within 3 months of completion. We had also established the Rising Fund, a small philanthropic initiative that provided $25,000 grants to women-owned startups with social impact components. The grants came with branding support from our junior teams, giving new entrepreneurs professional guidance, while providing our rising staff with ownership opportunities. Perhaps most meaningful to me personally was the scholarship I'd established at Northwestern University for women in marketing from underprivileged backgrounds, girls like I had been with talent and drive but limited resources. The scholarship covered not just tuition but living expenses and professional attire for interviews, removing the practical barriers that often derailed promising careers. These initiatives generated minimal revenue but immense fulfillment. They represented the kind of business I'd always wanted to build, one measured by impact as well as profit. And ironically, by prioritizing purpose alongside profitability, Phoenix Rising had achieved remarkable financial success. Our annual revenue had surpassed $15 million, with profit margins exceeding industry standards. The financial success allowed me personal freedom I once could only imagine. I had purchased a home overlooking Boston Harbor, not to impress others as my Beacon Hill residence had been intended to do, but because the sunrise over water brought me daily peace. I had invested significantly in renewable energy companies and women-led startups, building a portfolio that reflected my values while securing my future. At a charity gala benefiting women's education, I encountered Thomas Harrington, a senior partner at Maxwell's firm who had been present at the infamous dinner 3 years earlier. "Autumn Hayes," he said, extending his hand. "Remarkable what you've built." I've followed your progress with great interest. Thank you, Thomas. It's been a fulfilling journey. He lowered his voice. You might be interested to know that Maxwell's star has dimmed considerably at Blackwell and Stone. The Bingham account left with him after that dinner. Apparently the family patriarch was quite impressed with your dignity that evening. Several other accounts followed. Maxwell's been stuck in lateral moves ever since. I wasn't sure how to respond. My success had never been about Maxwell's failure. I hope he finds his way, I said finally. We all deserve the chance to evolve. Thomas studied me with newfound respect. You're a class act, Autumn. If you're ever interested in investment opportunities for Phoenix Rising's continued growth, my door is open. 1 month later, that casual offer evolved into something concrete. Phoenix Rising received an acquisition offer from a major holding company, $40 million, with retention packages for key leaders, including myself. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, prompting an emergency leadership meeting in our conference room. This is life-changing money, Rachel said, voicing what everyone was thinking. It's validation, Taylor added. But it also means giving up control of what we've built. I looked around at the team that had become my family. This isn't my decision alone. Phoenix Rising exists because each of you believed in it when it was just an idea born from a personal crisis. We make this decision together, understanding there's no wrong choice. We spent the next 2 weeks in deep analysis mode. We consulted with independent financial advisors, spoke confidentially with agencies that had been acquired by the same company, and conducted anonymous surveys of all 40 employees to understand their concerns and hopes. The decision crystallized gradually. We would remain independent, but accept a strategic investment from a minority partner, allowing expansion, without sacrificing our unique culture and values. The partner would need to demonstrate authentic alignment with our mission beyond platitudes about empowering women. As we began evaluating potential investment partners, my assistant interrupted a strategy session with unexpected news. Blackwell and Stone Investments is requesting a meeting to discuss becoming Phoenix Rising's strategic financial partner and handling our investment portfolio. The room fell silent, everyone aware of my history with the firm. Maxwell isn't part of their investment team, my assistant added quickly, but he's requested to join the meeting as an observer since he initially suggested approaching us. I took a deep breath. Schedule the meeting. 1 week later, I sat at the head of our conference table across from 3 Blackwell and Stone partners with Maxwell positioned slightly behind them, technically present but not leading the discussion. He looked older than his 37 years, with new lines around his eyes and a tightness to his smile that hadn't been there during our marriage. The firm's presentation was impressive, thorough analysis of our growth, potential strategic connections that could accelerate our expansion, and financial modeling that demonstrated deep understanding of our business. Throughout the 2-hour meeting, Maxwell remained uncharacteristically quiet, watching me lead my team with thinly veiled astonishment. After the formal presentation concluded, I asked to speak with Maxwell privately. My team exchanged concerned glances, but I reassured them with a confident nod. We walked to my office, its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Boston skyline. Quite a view, Maxwell said, hands in his pockets. Different perspective than our old place. That's what I needed, I replied. A different perspective. He turned to face me. I underestimated you, consistently and catastrophically. Yes, I agreed simply. You did. I've had a lot of time to reflect on our marriage, he continued. That dinner was inexcusable. But it was also the logical conclusion to years of me diminishing you to feel more significant myself. I studied him, searching for the manipulation that had once been his default. Instead, I found something unexpected, genuine regret. Thank you for acknowledging that, I said. But this meeting isn't about our past. It's about Phoenix Rising's future. Of course, he straightened his tie. Our investment committee was extremely impressed with your metrics. We're prepared to offer terms above industry standard. Maxwell, I interrupted gently. I appreciate Blackwell and Stone's interest. Their presentation was excellent. But surely you understand why I can't enter a financial partnership with the firm. His face fell slightly. The firm isn't one person, Autumn. No, but this building isn't big enough for both our companies to maintain comfortable professional distance. And while I've moved beyond our history, I have no desire to navigate it in board meetings. He nodded slowly. I thought you might say that. That's why I've put in for a transfer to our London office. If you accept Blackwell and Stone's offer, I won't be here. The gesture surprised me. Maxwell putting someone else's interests ahead of his convenience was unprecedented in my experience. That's considerate, I acknowledged. But my decision isn't about you anymore. It's about what's best for the company I've built and the people who've built it with me. As he turned to leave, Maxwell paused at the door. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. Not in the condescending way I used to be. Genuinely proud as one professional admiring another's exceptional work. Thank you, I said. That actually means something. After he left, I stood looking out over the harbor, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The woman who had fled a humiliating dinner in tears had built something so valuable that the very firm representing her lowest moment now sought to invest in her vision. There was a certain poetry to it, though not the kind I cared to explore further. We ultimately partnered with a women-led investment firm from Chicago, using their capital to expand Phoenix Rising's presence to the West Coast and launch our first international office in London. The decision felt aligned with our values while providing the growth resources we needed. Sometimes I wondered if Maxwell had really transferred to London, or if that had been a strategic bluff to influence my decision. I never checked. His role in my story had ended the night I walked out of that dinner, though it had taken me longer to fully release the emotional impact of his presence in my life. My lasting connection to Maxwell was not the man himself, but the catalyst he had provided. That moment of perfect clarity when seeing myself through his eyes had finally shown me the distorted lens I'd been using. Sometimes our greatest growth comes from our most painful moments, not because the pain itself is valuable, but because it forces us to examine what we've accepted as unchangeable. 5 years to the day after I walked out of Maison Laurent, leaving my marriage and old identity behind, I stood in the private dining room of that same restaurant. The crystal chandeliers still cast their warm glow over the hand-carved mahogany table, but tonight it was set for 60 rather than 16. Phoenix Rising's leadership team and key clients had gathered to celebrate our 5th anniversary and the opening of our London office. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Standing at the head of the table in a custom-designed power suit rather than an evening gown selected to complement my husband, I surveyed the room filled with people who had contributed to building something meaningful. Rachel, now our chief client officer, caught my eye and raised her champagne glass in a private toast to how far we'd come. The journey from that humiliating night to this triumphant one had taught me lessons I never could have learned in business school, or from any mentor. I had discovered that sometimes what feels like destruction is actually the necessary clearing of ground for something stronger to be built. The dinner that had seemed like my lowest moment had actually been the foundation of my greatest achievement. Most importantly, I had learned that the voice telling me I wasn't enough, the voice I had mistakenly believed was Maxwell's, had actually been my own. Maxwell had merely exploited the doubts I already harbored. Silencing that voice had been my true liberation, far more significant than leaving a toxic marriage. My personal life had evolved alongside my professional success. 2 years after my divorce, I had met Ryan at a business ethics conference where we were both speaking. A tech entrepreneur who had built and sold 2 companies focused on environmental sustainability. Ryan approached relationships with the same authenticity and mutual respect he brought to business. Our connection had developed naturally without the power dynamics that had defined my marriage to Maxwell. "You never make me feel small to make yourself feel big," I told Ryan early in our relationship. "Why would I want a smaller version of you?" he had replied, genuinely puzzled by the concept. "Your success and strength are what attracted me in the first place." Now, as I prepared to address the anniversary gathering, Ryan gave me an encouraging nod from his seat. Unlike Maxwell, who had always positioned himself at the center of attention, Ryan was comfortable supporting from the sidelines when it was my moment to shine. 5 years ago, I sat in this very room and experienced what felt like the end of my world. I began the room falling silent. What I couldn't have known then was that it was actually the beginning. That night forced me to confront how I had gradually surrendered my voice, my ambitions, and my sense of self to become an accessory in someone else's story. I looked around at the faces watching me, some who had been with Phoenix Rising from our tiny first office, others who had joined as we expanded across the country, and now internationally. Phoenix Rising was born from that moment of clarity. But what began as one woman's attempt to rebuild her life has become something far greater than I could have envisioned. Together we've created not just a successful company but a community that lifts women up rather than diminishing them to make space for ego. I shared specific milestones in our journey: the first major client who took a chance on us, the subscription model that revolutionized our industry, approached the Phoenix Academy that had now graduated over 200 women, entrepreneurs. But more importantly, I highlighted the philosophy that had guided us through challenges and growth. We've rejected the false choice between ambition and well-being, between professional success and personal fulfillment. We've demonstrated that empathy and authenticity are business strengths, not liabilities. And we've built our success not by following established paths, but by creating new ones aligned with our values. The company had grown beyond my wildest expectations. Phoenix Rising now employed over 100 people across 4 offices, with annual revenue exceeding $100 million. We had been valued at $250 million during our last investment round. The small marketing consultancy that Maxwell had dismissed as a cute hobby had eclipsed his own career trajectory many times over, but the metrics that made me proudest weren't on any balance sheet. Our employee satisfaction scores consistently ranked above 90%. The businesses we'd helped brand had collectively created thousands of jobs. Our philanthropic initiatives had funded startups that might never have launched without that initial support. Success isn't measured by the empire you build, I concluded. It's measured by the positive impact you create and the people you lift up along the way. 5 years ago, I walked out of this restaurant alone and terrified. Tonight I stand here surrounded by a community that reminds me daily of what true success looks like. After the formal program concluded, I found myself standing near the terrace doors where I had made my exit 5 years earlier. Rachel joined me, handing me a fresh glass of champagne. "Full circle," she observed. "Ever regret not taking Maxwell's firm's investment offer? That would have been the ultimate power move." I laughed. "That would have been about him, not about us. Everything we've built has been about looking forward, not back." The truth was, Maxwell had become increasingly irrelevant to my story. I had heard through industry channels that he had indeed transferred to London, where he had married again and was expecting his first child. I wished him well, genuinely hoping he had grown as much as I had in the years since our marriage ended. The lessons of my journey had become the foundation of the mentorship program. I now ran for women leaving difficult situations. Not just bad marriages, but toxic work environments, unsupportive family dynamics, and limiting self-beliefs. The hardest person to stand up to isn't someone else, I often told them. It's the voice inside that tells you to settle, to shrink, to accept less than you deserve. Silencing that voice is your first act of courage. Everything else follows from there. As Phoenix Rising continued to grow, I remained vigilant about creating a culture that valued people as whole human beings, rather than productivity machines. We had implemented 4-day work weeks, generous family leave policies, mental health support, and professional development opportunities that benefited employees regardless of whether they stayed with the company long term. These policies weren't just ethical choices, they were strategic advantages. Our turnover rate was a fraction of industry standard. Our recruitment efforts attracted top talent, despite offering slightly lower salaries than multinational agencies. And our creative work maintained its distinctive edge precisely because our team members brought their full, rested, inspired selves to their roles. Looking toward the future, I was excited about our plans to expand the Phoenix Academy to offer scholarships for women from disadvantaged backgrounds, and our upcoming launch of Phoenix Rising Foundation, providing resources for women in crisis situations similar to what I had faced 5 years earlier. The empire I had built was valuable not for the status or wealth it had created, but for the platform it provided to effect meaningful change. The woman who had once measured her worth through her husband's accomplishments now recognized that her greatest achievement was helping others discover their own value and power. As the anniversary celebration continued around me, I took a moment of quiet reflection. The path from that humiliating dinner to this triumphant evening hadn't been linear or easy. There had been moments of doubt, fear, and exhaustion along the way, but each challenge had refined, rather than defined me. "I've been thinking," I told Ryan later that night as we walked along the harbor near our home, "about what I would say to my younger self, the woman sitting at that dinner table trying to make herself smaller to accommodate someone else's ego." "What would you tell her?" he asked. "That the moment that feels like your greatest humiliation can become the foundation of your greatest triumph. That walking away from something toxic isn't failure, it's the first step toward creating something authentic. That your worth isn't determined by someone else's inability to see your value." Ryan squeezed my hand. "She figured it out eventually." "Yes," I agreed, looking out over the water reflecting the city lights. "She did." "What's the hardest thing you've ever walked away from? Did it lead to unexpected growth?" I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. If this journey of rebuilding from rock bottom resonated with you, please subscribe and share with someone who might need this message today. Remember, sometimes the end of what you thought was your story is actually just the beginning of a much better one. Thank you for being part of this community. I'm sending strength to anyone currently finding the courage to walk away from what no longer serves them and toward what you truly deserve.